thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with part 4 of the Historical Jesus and Mythical Christ, a lecture by Gerald Massey. The mythical Messiah was Horus in the Osirian Mythos, Har-Khuti in the Sut-Typhonian, Khunsu in that of Atum-Ra, Yu in the cult of Atum-Ra, and the Christ of the Gospels is an amalgam of all these characters. The Christ is the Good Shepherd, so was Horus. Christ is the Lamb of God, so was Horus. Christ is the Bread of Life, so was Horus. Christ is the Truth and the Life, so was Horus. Christ is the Fan-bearer, so was Horus. Christ is the Lord, so was Horus. Christ is the way and the door of life. Horus was the path by which they traveled out of the sepulchre. He is the God whose name is written with the hieroglyphic sign of the road or way. Jesus is he that should come, and Yu, the root of the name in Egyptian, means to come. Atum-Hept, as the Su, the son of Atum, or of Ptah, was the ever-coming one, who is always portrayed as the marching youngster. In the act and attitude of coming, Horus included both sexes. The child, or the soul, is either sex, and potentially of both, hence the hermaphroditical deity, and Jesus in Revelation is the young man who has the female paps. Atum-Hetep signifies he who comes with peace. This is the character in which Jesus is announced by the angels, and when Jesus comes to his disciples after the resurrection, it is as the bringer of peace. Learn of me, and ye shall find rest, says the Christ. Khunsu-Nefer-Hept is the God of rest, peace in person. The Egyptian Jesus, Atum-Hept, was the second Atum. Paul's Jesus is the second Adam. In one rendition of John's Gospel, instead of the only begotten Son of God, a variant reading gives the only begotten God, which has been declared an impossible rendering. But the only begotten God was a special type in Egyptian mythology, and the phrase re-identifies the divinity whose emblem is the beetle. Hor Apollo says, to denote the only begotten or a father, the Egyptians delineated a scarabus. By this they symbolize an only begotten because the creature is self-produced, being unconceived by a female. Now the youthful manifester of the beetle god was the Atum-Hept, the Egyptian Jesus. The very phraseology of John is common to the inscriptions which tell of him who was the beginner of the beginning from the first, and who made all things, but who himself was not made. I quote verbatim, not only was the beetle god continued in the only begotten God, the beetle type was also brought on as a symbol of the Christ. Ambrose and Augustine, amongst the Christian fathers, identified Jesus with and as the good scarabus, which further identifies the Jesus of John's Gospel with the Jesus of Egypt, who was the ever-coming one and the bringer of peace, whom I have always shown to be the Jesus to whom the book of Ecclesiastes is inscribed and ascribed in the Apocrypha. In accordance with this continuation of the Kamite symbols, it was also maintained by some secretaries that Jesus was a potter and not a carpenter, and the fact is that this only begotten beetle god, who is portrayed sitting at the potter's wheel, forming the egg or shaping the vase symbol of creation, was the potter personified, as well as the only begotten God in Egypt. The character and teachings of the canonical Christ are composed of contradictions, which cannot be harmonized as those of a human being, whereas they are always true to the mythos. He is the Prince of Peace, and yet he asserts that he came not to bring peace. I came not to send peace, but a sword. And not only is the Atum-Ra the peace bringer by name in one character, he is the sword personified in the other. I am the living image of Atum, proceeding from him as a sword. Both characters belong to the mythical Messiah in the ritual, who also calls himself the Great Disturber and the Great Tranquilizer, the God Contention, and the God of Peace. The Christ of the canonical Gospels has several prototypes, and sometimes the copy is diverted or the trait is caught from one original and sometimes from the other. The Christ of Luke's Gospel has a character entirely distinct from that of John's Gospel. Here he is the great exorciser and caster out of demons. John's Gospel contains no case of possession or obsession, no certain man who had devils this long time, no child possessed with a devil, no blind and dumb man possessed with a devil. Other miracles are performed by the Christ of John, but not these, because John's is a different type of Christ, and the original of the great healer in Luke's Gospel may be found in the god Khunsu, who was the divine healer, the supreme one amongst all the other healers and saviors, especially as the caster out of demons and the expeller of possessing spirits. He is called in the text the great God, the driver away of possession. In the stele of the possessed princes, this god in his effigy is sent for by the chief of Bactine, that he may come and cast out a possessing spirit from the king's daughter, who has an evil movement in her limbs. The demon recognizes the divinity just as the devil recognizes Jesus, the expeller of evil spirits. Also, the god Khunsu is lord over the pig, a type of Sut. He is portrayed in the disk of the full moon of Easter in the act of offering the pig as a sacrifice. Moreover, in the judgment scenes, when the wicked spirits are commanded and sent back into the abyss, their mode of return to the lake of primordial matter is by entering the body of swine. Says Horus to the gods, speaking of the condemned one, "When I sent him back to his place, he went, and he had been transformed into a black pig." So when the exorcist in Luke's Gospel cast out Legion, the devils ask permission of the Lord of the pig to be allowed to enter the swine, and he gives them leave. This and much more that might be adduced tends to differentiate the Christ of Luke and to identify him with Khunsu rather than with Atum-Ra, the Egyptian Jesus, who is reproduced in the Gospel according to John. In this way, it can be proved that the history of Christ in the Gospels is one long and complete catalog of likeness to the mythical Christ, the solar or luni-solar god. The Litany of Ra, for example, is addressed to the sun god in a variety of characters, many of which are assigned to the Christ of the Gospels. Ra is the supreme power, the beetle that rests in the Empyrean, who is born as his own son. This, as already said, is the God in John's Gospel, who says, "I am the Father of one," and who is the Father born as his own Son. For he says, in knowing and seeing the Son, "From henceforth ye know him and have seen him," i.e., the Father. Ra is designated the soul that speaks. Christ is the Word. Ra is the destroyer of venom. Jesus says, "In my name they shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them." In one character, Ra is the outcast, so Jesus had nowhere to lay his head. Ra is the timid one who sheds tears in the form of the afflicted. He is called Remi, the weeper. This weeping god passes through Remi, the place of weeping, and there conquers on the behalf of his followers. In the ritual, the god says, "I have desolated the place of Remi." This character is sustained by Jesus in the mourning over Israel that was so desolated. The words of John, "Jesus wept," are like a cavern statue of the afflicted one, as Remi, the weeper. Ra is also the god who makes the mummy come forth. Jesus makes the mummy come forth in the shape of Lazarus, and in the Roman catacombs the risen Lazarus is not only represented as a mummy, but is an Egyptian mummy which has been eviscerated and swathed for the eternal abode. Ra says to the mummy, "Come forth," and Jesus cries, "Lazarus, come forth." Ra manifests as the Burning One, he who sends destruction, or sends his fire into the place of destruction. He sends fire upon the rebels. His form is that of the God of the furnace. Christ also comes in the person of this Burning One, the sender of destruction by fire. He is proclaimed by Matthew to be the baptizer with fire. He says, "I came to send fire on the earth." He is portrayed as the God of the furnace, which shall burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. He is to cast the rebellious into a furnace of fire, and send the condemned ones into everlasting fire. All this was natural when applied to the solar god, and is supposed to become supernatural when misapplied to a supposed human being, to whom it never could apply. The solar fire was the primal African font of theological hellfire and hell. The Litany of Ra collects the manifold characters that make up the total God, termed Teb Timta, and the Gospels have gathered up the mythical remains. Thus, the result is in each case identical or entirely similar. From beginning to end, the canonical Gospels contain the drama of the mysteries of the Lunai solar god, narrated as a human history. The scene on the Mount of Transfiguration is obviously derived from the ascent of Osiris into the Mount of Transfiguration in the moon. The sixth day was celebrated as that of the change and transformation of the solar god into the lunar orb, which he re-entered on that day as the regenerator of its light. With this, we may compare the statement made by Matthew that after 6 days Jesus went up into a high mountain apart, and he was transfigured, and his face did shine as the sun, of course, and his garments became white as light. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.